Hello, everyone. My name is Eric K. Thomas. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Quintessential Gentleman, and today we are sitting here with Mario Reyes, and he's an author, a poet, and just an all-around guy doing some great things, talking about talking about fatherhood, talking about children, and poetry. And we're just excited to talk to him today. What's going on, my brother? How are you?
Peace, King. How are you today?
I'm doing good, doing good in these Atlanta streets.
No, you're in the south side. That's
sorry.
Atlanta.
South side, not Atlanta.
I ain't gonna throw your county out there, boy. Yeah, that ain't Atlanta.
Awesome. So it's a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to go ahead and kick this off. I want to know what inspired you to want to become an author.
I've always written poetry since I was 15 years old. You know, it's always been like a knack. I'm from the Bronx, so of course, hip hop kid, born in the 1980s. So you can imagine what that influence was like, right?
So you wanted to be a rapper? I read that you was writing raps.
Yeah. Capone and Noriega, they set me on fire. After I heard the album, I went crazy. But I can't stay on beat. So the best next thing to do if you got bars and you can't stay on beat, become a poet.
Great job.
You know, that's some jewel. That's some
okay.
game for the kids, right? So started doing that, and I was getting pushed a lot. Like, hey, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book? But I didn't want to do anything that wasn't going to be successful, like commercially, nor did I want to do something that my heart wasn't behind. So I read a lot of poetry books that just seemed like a collection of random ideas and thoughts. I wanted something to be more comprehensive, and it had to be what my life revolved around, which at the time was my children. Still revolves around my children. I think I got a little bit more identity now. But I was at the barbershop in Baltimore, and I watched my barber six give 6 kids in a row shape-ups and haircuts and give them fatherly advice because their moms was there with them. So when I sat down, I was like, yo, how's it feel to be like such a giant in the community? And he's like, bro, all of their dads are either locked up, killed, or, you know, for whatever reason, aren't a part of their life. So he has to do that every day, day in and day out. And I came up with a line, you know, your brain as an artist never turns off. Yeah. So the line was, a son with no father is a book with no author. A main character developed by his peers and his barber. Yeah. So that was the bar. I was like, okay, but it felt like heavy. It was a pregnant phrase. So it started off as a line in a poem, then it became its own poem. And then I felt like I found the lead I needed to write my book. A son with no father is a book with no author. The whole book itself is a metaphor because as you read it, you start to fill in the fact that my son actually has an author and the masterpiece he's trying to write, you know? And the way it's structured, I give you an anecdote followed by a lesson, followed by a poem. So if you're into dialogue and story time, then every chapter has a specific subject that has a story associated with it. But then if you're into logic, like me as a man, I like understanding the science behind things. So then I gave the lesson I was hoping to impart onto him. Now, sometimes I did good. Other times I think I could have did better, but it's transparent, feel me? And then I end it all with the art that it inspires, being the poetry. So once I got to that point, I understood how to format it. I had the topic. I thought about what else, and it just hits me like, this is a resource, not just a poetry book, not just a book in general, fatherhood book. So I created a workbook to partner with the book. And it allows parents to ask children questions and children to ask parents questions to help humanize the experience. Because so many times we get caught up in like the titles of things that you fail to realize before I was dad, I was Mario, Wario, Poppy Wag, Super Noodle, you know what I mean? Man Effects, all the other names I was given growing up, right? And now we got the workbook, we got a book, but the best work comes from the actual workshops that we host. underneath my nonprofit, Manifest Destiny. And we bring fathers and sons together, and you have no idea how powerful it is to see a son looking at his dad. And I got like dads in there that's 6'4", no neck, you know, they like 300, swole, dude.
Right.
And they're crying as we're going through the chapter on love or manhood. And they're crying because they've had to suppress their emotions their whole lives. And what they're understanding now is they get to put that period where the comma in generational traumas were. Yeah. So the book was birthed from that small situation that I just happened to be at the barbershop. It's become a movement in itself.
What was your relationship with your father?
Oh, my pops was he dope dude, but old school Caribbean, you know, Puerto Rican. So he was born in Puerto Rico, but moved to the States. And he was raised, you know, with underneath an iron throne, you know, the men rule the house, you seen, not heard, don't talk back, that kind of situation. My mother, a little bit more liberal. So there was a lot of conflict in that regard, but I could say he was always there. Good, bad, and indifferent. Gave me all that he knew. You understand? So when we stand on the shoulders of giants, it's not for us to judge or criticize what they gave you or what they failed to, because they only did the best that they knew how. It's on me to, you know, stir the pot a little bit more, and with education and other kind of epiphanies, build on what he gave me. But you know, my dad was dope. He was my not just my dad, he was my cousin's father's. He was the dad of the block, you know what I mean? Fed everybody, would throw friends in the car, and we'll drive down to Manhattan and hit up a festival, take my friends camping with us. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are experiences that kids in the Bronx don't know anything about, that he exposed them to. So the level of respect that he garners from all of my friends, from the kids that I played in the sandbox with to the dudes that I was in the military that played in a whole different sandbox with. You know what I'm saying? Respect all around.
Yeah. No, awesome. What do you say to people who say, you know, in the narrative that people from the Bronx or like the metropolitan, like their dads are not in their lives, or fatherless kids? It's this big narrative that, you know, people from urban cities don't grow up without fathers.
Once I will implore them to do the knowledge on why. Let's talk about the Rockefeller drug laws in New York. Let's talk about the criminalization of Black culture. And under Black culture, brown, Puerto Rican, you know, Caribbean culture falls underneath that. And the strategic targeting of communities of color to impose heroin and crack in that regard. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when we talk about that they weren't there, we talk about it like these were natural occurrences in which a child was born and they just was like, hey, they had everything going right in their life and they opted to move and leave. No, they got locked up, they got killed, they got all of these things that happened. But I could look back in my childhood and I had a ton of uncles. Yeah. It's sad that only two are still here, my dad and my other uncle, because that time frame introduced so many demons with no education and the vilification of it, that, you know, they started getting picked off one by one, whether it be through liver cirrhosis, getting murdered, going to jail. You know what I mean? Like, it's, when we start talking, it's a much heavier conversation than just, oh, it was their choice not to be there. No, there's socio-political reasons. And if y'all want to have that conversation, that would probably require a whole nother interview. You know what I'm saying?
I get it. So your book, A Son with No Father, A Book with No Author, after a father reads that book, what do you want them to feel?
I want them to understand that they're not alone in the way they tackle certain things. Like, as a parent, you're constantly second guessing yourself. Like, oh, did I handle that right? Is that going to leave a trauma or a scar for them to deal with the rest of their lives? You try to like reflect on your childhood and think and try to find a balance between what you understand as an adult and man versus what you thought and perceived as a boy. And you know, Generation X and millennials are very different creatures in what they're exposed to. Like we didn't have the collective importance of the humankind in our phones and our pockets. You know what I'm saying? So a father would sit back and he'll understand that one, he's not alone. He might get some tips, or he might see some opportunity to criticize how I handle something. You know, I think those are both are, as long as it sparks thought and conversation and dialogue internally, or more importantly, externally with your wife, with your kids, or whoever, then I've done my job. Even the title itself is a gut punch. You know, A Son with No Father is a book with no author. I've had a lot of people come up to me like, you know, I ain't know how to take that. You know, father, like dads that were fatherless.
Yeah.
And I tell them, like, listen, if you picked up The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, but you didn't know who wrote it, is it still a masterpiece? Indeed it is. Right. So it's the same book, it's just missing a table of context.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So when I had those conversations about what parents with the fathers and sons and mothers get out of the book, they all come to me with like something different. Matter of fact, I remember one time this father, his son came out. And in the book, we talk about sexuality, and my son just randomly at 8 years old asked me, what's gay?
Right.
So I had to frame, like, why are you asking that? And he tells me, well, it's because the older kids are calling the younger kids that. So I immediately realized that that word is being weaponized.
Right.
Through that weaponization, I had to audit, one, my beliefs and my biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious, and say, what type of human do I want to raise? So I said, what's your favorite football team? So me and my son, he's like, the Giants. I'm like, okay. What's your best friends? And his best friend is a Falcons fan. I said, do you hate him because he likes the Falcons? He goes, no. I said, why? He goes, because we just both like football. That's it right there, Papa. Wow. If you like girls and he likes boys, it's not for you to project any hate onto him for that, because the important thing is that you love people.
Right.
If you could love people, you're light years ahead of everybody. And he was like, okay, I understand that, you know? So I was able to frame it in a way, like that was one of the instances in which I think I did pretty good, you know, 7:30 in the morning on the way to drop him off at school.
Right.
Other times, you know, maybe some of my trauma might have came out and I projected it onto him. He didn't deserve that. And we even engage in those conversations when I'm able to recognize that in myself later. So, you know, I think as fathers read the book, it jumpstarts a lot of introspection and reflection on how they're approaching things. And then typically I get hit up and the father will sign up for the workshop. And then through the workshop, it's actually, you know, I'm not a therapist in any way. I just provide an environment where you could be yourself without judgment. And I'll offer up what I've learned.
So let's go into the workshops. So how are they structured, right? So you have father and a son, and they come here. Is there a goal that they are coming here to get from coming to this workshop? Or is it just kind of like a conversation, which is more of like a safe space?
Well, the book has 8 specific subjects, ranging from manhood to love, family, school, bullying, sexuality, race. So we talk we done weekly courses, means we meet once a week, or I've done more consolidated ones when I'm traveling. I prefer the 8-week course because then you could really touch on subjects and it doesn't feel as rushed, right? So what we do is each week revolves around a subject. So let's give you love, for instance. We start off with a prayer, non-denominational prayer. I don't want to feel anybody to feel ostracized.
Right.
Start with that. We introduce the subject. Once we introduce the subject, we start going into what that subject means, and not just for, like, I could be a lecturer all day. I prefer it to be a conversation. And as the weeks go on, these father-son pairs become a tribe. So now you see fathers start reminiscing on what they thought love was growing up. And then the boys will talk about their first love letters to a little girl. You know what I'm saying? So we talk about love and how you share it. So every workshop has the prayer, the introduction. Then I give my spiel and lesson as to how you handle things such as love. You know, one meaning you love yourself first. What does self-love look like? How do you define love? Then we talk about when you are able to use the word love, you know, how that itself could be weaponized, and or a way that you could express interest without necessarily going to love. How that's like the nuclear option, man. When you say it, essentially what you're doing is you're inviting somebody into your family, right? So then we have a exercise that we do together. That's always like the best part, because now you get to see people collaborate and do activities together. So for like the love lesson, we have the fathers write a love poem to the son, and the son write a love poem to the fathers. And you put it in an envelope, and on it you write, open in case of a love emergency. So you're not able to open it up. You're not able to read it ever until you get to that point in which there's conflict and you need to be reminded of who you're dealing with. You know, I think, and I've had a father actually had to open it up one time, and he offered up how it kept him grounded. And he was able to then respond to the conflict and point of contention with the lens of love and not aggression.
Right.
Which we typically are taught as men to meet everything with.
Yeah.
You know, there's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive. And that's talked about in the manhood chapter.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. What do you think about the stories now where it's like, let boys be boys, right? I think growing up at your age, my age, which I don't think we're that far apart, is, you know, you boys can't cry. You gotta, your emotion, you gotta go, you have to be tough. You gotta, and it's like, and even how they reference us, it wasn't boys, it's young men, you know, and we never got that space to actually be boys. And I would say, just from my opinion, I feel like it's changing, and I'm hopeful and happy about that you're allowing boys to be boys, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
He said, suck it up. They say that men don't cry. You see, that's an adage that I heard my whole life. My father mixed toxic into his tonic, cocked his fist back, and made a dry cocktail out of my eye. The moment you show weakness, your manhood is cheapened. The best offense is apathy. We learn to swim in the deep end. Latino machismo taught by most Puerto Ricans. But there's no joy when you're unable to be a whole human being. I told you I was raised by a traditional Caribbean dad. And I remember those days of something happening and my feelings were hurt. I was physically hurt. Men don't cry. So suppression, pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down. And then when it finally came out, it erupts. I think there's a level of toxicity in that, but I'm very mindful of the term toxic masculinity, which is how the conversation is framed in contemporary times. Masculinity is not a dirty word, because if that's the case, then the overcorrections of feminism are just as toxic, right? So what we can say is that masculinity is a level of strength and understanding how to remain composed and understand when and where you're supposed to demonstrate it. So I believe that, so in the manhood chapter and workshop, we talk about, are you allowed to cry as a man? And that's when you see those big dudes really get touched, because they never were able to do that. They took it out on the
Right.
football field. They took it out in the streets. They took it out in their home or their spouses. Typically, the people closest to you get hurt the most because they're just in proximity. And we tell these kids, like, you need to experience every element of your human being, of your human experience. Because if you don't, you are going to, you're never going to find out who you truly are if you're unable to feel the feelings. Now, you're allowed to feel them, but also understand it's all about management. That's where emotional intelligence comes into play. So while we're teaching kids how to be intelligent in science and math and social studies, we're not teaching them or equipping them to be emotionally intelligent, or we're grouping them in with girls and women. And whereas I understand there's overlapping there, the same way women have very unique needs and issues that they deal with, so do we. We have to deal with the level of expectation that is far beyond what we're capable or willing to give early on. You know, how many times have you heard that? You talk about men don't cry. What about this one? You got to be the man of the house when I'm not there.
Yep.
You 10.
That pressure, that representation. Yep.
You're 10 years old. So now, essentially, you have an unhealthy relationship with your mother because now she's extracting and projecting everything that she needs in a mate on you. And it robs you of the son-mother relationship that you might have had. It robs you of the relationship you might have had with your siblings, because now you have to act in a manner as if you're their dad and you're their responsibility. And now that's unfair. But we learned a long time ago that fair doesn't live here. So that's why through those workshops and creating those villages of fathers, it's so important, because the weight isn't as heavy when you get to share the burden. And sometimes you're not just sharing burdens, you're sharing blessings because they're children. You know what I'm saying? So we grab mentors, your uncle, your OG cousin, whoever it is. If that's your father figure, bring him. You know, sometimes we let women sit in on certain subjects just for a unique perspective, because sometimes they can see something we can't. It's not about isolating. It's about encouraging and healing. Long with the answer, my bad.
No. You're good. This is awesome. I want to know, you spoke a little bit about it, but I definitely want to get specifically from you what you define masculinity as.
Masculinity is summed up in one word, and it's really accountability. You know, and it's understanding the difference between responsibility and accountability. Give you an example. You're not responsible for being born in whatever disposition you were born into, your environment, your family structure. However, you will be accountable on how you deal with it. So one of the my son makes fun of me because I got mad like little catchphrases and idioms and whatnot. You know, it's possible to happen, right? So I tell him, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. So the first time he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you know, I keep hearing I'm a product of my environment all day. All day, that's what everybody's excuses. But you let them tell it, they believe they're leaders. You know, it's a conflict of interest right there, bro. So when I say be a thermostat, not a thermometer can only tell you what that environment temperature is. A thermostat controls it. So accountability again. As a man, no matter where I move, I assert myself in that community and let it be known that I am there to make things better if they need to be better, or work in a communion with whatever's already working. I am the change I want to see everywhere I go. You know, we talked earlier about like those Southern hospitality and becoming like almost like imposing, being from the North. You're not used to that level of camaraderie.
Right.
But as a man, if I walk by a kid on my block, and even if he got you know what I'm saying, he got his joint going on. Peace, King, how are you today? Just in that little exchange, he's never had somebody refer to him in a regal way before.
Mm-hmm.
So you see how they pivot after that. Oh, sorry, sir. How you doing, sir? Like, I carry myself as a sir because I'm accountable to everybody and everywhere I go. Like, God forbid it ever happened, but if there was a mass shooting around me, I'm gonna die that day because I am accountable to make sure that child next to me survives.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You have to be careful because we live in America and it's 2022. So the chances of a mass shooting happening, but that's a whole nother interview that we could discuss.
This right here,
Mm-hmm.
he might have been like 3 years old when we took that picture by accident. You know, we just caught it, those fly. 15 now, 6 feet, boxes, decent back. It's looking like something, looking like a problem out there. Yeah. Still is a kid because he's mine, and I made sure I provided him that luxury to be his kid as long as you want. And in Atlanta, goes out with chill with his boys at on the belt line and went to Pawn City Market. Then I get news on Sunday that there was a 12-year-old that just got murdered at Atlantic Station, another spot where he likes to hang out with his boys. I got to be mindful, like, yo, it's a numbers game, like you said. You letting him out there. You want to give him enough on that leash so that way he could be socialized and understand how to move in the world. But those threats are out there. Scary. I feel like I could write a whole nother chapter, a whole nother book on fatherhood from 13 to 15.
Them teenage years.
It's a whole nother set of challenges. But one of the good things that you recognize is that consistency matters. That's it. I'm still here. Dude.
Showing up, being president.
I'm gonna be here. You're gonna mess up, I'll be here. You do great, I'll be here. Whatever it is, I'm gonna be here.
You could do it. I'm sure you could do a chapter on social media as well. Because I think about too, like one of my issues. I talk about having, we have a conversation about having kids and things like that. And I'm like, do I really want to raise a child in this age of social media, right? Because I'll just take one aspect of it is, when you got bullied in school, but then you would come home, you safe at home, you with your friends when you're not bullied because you're with your core friends. Now, when you get bullied, they videotape it, it goes on the internet, and now social media, now the world is able to laugh. And that's why it gets so dangerous and how people feel like they can't come back from the embarrassment, you know?
It's funny, like we do touch on social media and it's usually in the bullying or sexuality parts of the workshop. I can say one of the worst things I ever did for my children was getting them a phone. Or like you just see the imagination and creativity dwindle, and then they just become slaves to the device, right? I regret it, but again, if I didn't, now they're gonna be the weird kids that don't have phones because their kids don't, and then there'll be trust issues, blah blah blah. So there's again those fine lines you got to walk.
Right.
But with social media, the one things that I tell him 2 things. I'm lying. Him and my daughter. The 2 things I tell them are: 1, the internet is forever. I know this because I've been working on the internet since 1999. The military.
Right, you know.
I'm in IT. Like the military told me everything I need to know. If I needed to dig some dirt up, I know the channels and how to go about finding it, right? So that's 1. The internet's forever. And 2, it's that the internet might be forever, but people's attention spans aren't. So yeah, you might be the talk of the town on Tuesday.
Yeah.
By Tuesday afternoon, nobody's gonna remember because somebody else is gonna be the talk of the town.
Right.
Like, the turnaround is fast. The attrition rate is so high on embarrassment. Don't worry, just write it out. Enjoy it. Crack jokes on yourself if that's the case.
Right.
You got to pull the Eminem in 8 Mile.
Right, right. So last question for you is, what advice do you have for men who have like recently became fathers?
Sure. It is the simplest and probably most elemental advice you give. Enjoy every second.
Mm.
Enjoy the moments where you're losing your sleep. Enjoy the embarrassing moments, the frustrating moments. They all go hand in hand with the best parts of you. The children are going to teach you more about yourself than you think, than you're teaching them.
Mm.
Teach you patience, going to teach you, especially as a single dad,
Yeah.
having to nurture a baby girl
Mm.
and be mindful of how you talk to her. You got to talk with her. You know, with a boy, making sure you are extending the level of safety to him, so he feels like he's allowed to feel. You know, a lot of times we talk when I did interviews for my book from the fathers and men that I admired, or my OGs. I asked them one thing that they regretted, and the one thing they said they all regretted was not being softer with their sons, including my dad. They all said the same thing. So I got those jewels at an early enough time that I was able to soften how I dealt with my son. You know, and I think our relationship is a testimony to that. You know, the fact that he could call me on a Saturday and be like, "Yo, I need you to get me." All right, say less. I'm not gonna ask why. I'm not gonna ask. Just drop the pen. So yeah, you gotta enjoy. Even like I talked about, like, you know, teenage years are frustrating, but this is the time when you lean in more. Like a lot. Oh, I think that's a good piece of advice. Instead of falling back because you believe they're becoming their own person and men, you gotta lean in more. And not leaning in more in an imposing way, but leaning in more in which that adage of "I'm your dad, not your friend" will ensure that you don't get any intel and they won't come to you with anything. When you lean in and say, "Hey, I could be both. I could be your friend and your father," that really facilitates a healthy conversation and dynamic between the two of y'all. So like I said, even though these stages are a little bit more complicated, a little harder, a little bit more attitudes, a lot more talk back, you know, all right, cool. Again, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So now you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it.
Awesome, awesome. So what can we look forward to from Mr. Mario Reyes?
Well, a lot actually. This week I'm going to Art Basel and I'll be hosting a panel discussion on NFTs and the juncture where art meets technology. My wife is a fine artist, and together we started a nonprofit organization called Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny, we bring art programs to underserved communities, to children, and she handles the artistic aspects. I do poetry. I teach them like the unique dynamics of spoken word in the Black and brown community, how we were able to preserve our cultures and customs and courtesies. You know, what else we got going? I'm doing a lot more public speaking, a lot more keynote speaking in the near future. I got a lot stirring in the pot I'm excited about, you know. And of course, there'll be more books to come. I'm in the process of writing my daughter's book, Hurricane Her, because any father with a daughter knows that she just comes in and washes away everything you thought you knew about the female race, because sometimes it feels that way, that they're different, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mario, for chatting with us. I really appreciate it. This was awesome.
Sure, my brother. Thank you.
Of course.